This week's episode of Still Untitled is brought to you by Udemy, the largest marketplace for online learning. Whether you're looking to learn something new or just sharpen your skills, Udemy has over 65,000 courses starting at just $11.99. Students around the world choose Udemy to discover new passions, expand their skills, and even change careers. Visit ude.my/untitled or download the Udemy app to learn anytime, anywhere. And now on with the show. Welcome to Still Untitled, the Adam Savage Project. I'm Norm.
I'm Adam.
And I'm a mother.
Ladies and gentlemen, regular, except on a long time scale, tested contributor, Karen Savage, my mom.
Not just any mother.
Not just any mother, my
Adam's
mother.
mom.
Adam Savage.
My origin story is here in the building.
How are you doing?
I'm having a wonderful time out here. I've been here since Friday, and I've been royally entertained by Adam and Julia. And last night went to eat at Jardiniere.
Yes.
Where my grandson works.
This is, thing one now works in a restaurant in San Francisco, and it's changed his life. He's loving every second of it. We went back into the kitchen. We got a tour of the kitchen, and he gave us a tour, just beaming, like light, hearts shooting out of his eyes. Just the best.
He looks 2 years older.
He does.
He really does. He looks so, and the food there is wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful indeed.
Awesome. And I hear that you're a listener of the podcast, too.
I am very much a watcher of the podcast. I absolutely am.
I mentioned on the podcast recently, because Mom doesn't like it when I hide my face behind the microphone in order to talk. She says, "Could you make your beautiful face visible?" And I'm like, maybe.
It's the best way to get the right audio.
Aren't mothers always saying that to their children? Take your hair out of your face. Let us see your beautiful face.
It is. I've said this before, but there is a way in which all the ways in which your parents ever drove you nuts come back to you the second you meet your kid for the first time. And you're like Carrie Ann Moss in that bit in The Matrix where Neo says, "Can you fly that Huey helicopter?" And she says, "Not yet." And then goes, "Boom. Okay, let's go." That's what it's like the moment I met the boys. I was like, oh, wow. I understand all of that stuff I thought was bullshit. I now see.
And I remember you calling me up and telling me, "Oh my God, you never warned me that I will never have a peaceful moment again for the rest of my life."
Get your
That wasn't
sleep in
exactly
when you can.
true.
It was more, I mean, you meant more that you loved them so much, that you were a hostage to fortune at this point now, more than you ever had been. And it's a rare discovery.
It's a book I recommend to new parents, to every new parent, is Operating Instructions by Anne Lamott. Anne Lamott is a local writer. She lives up in Marin, an incredible writer. And she's written both fiction and nonfiction. And her nonfiction is what I'm most familiar with. And I find her to be a rigorous and unflinching reporter of her own life. And she talks, the reason I love Operating Instructions is because it discusses what it's like to raise a child, but it discusses all the really dark feelings, and they happen. They are part of the process. And you feel terrible about hating your kid at 4 a.m. when you can't see straight. And yet those emotions arise. And she described living through both of her parents dying of cancer over a period of a few years and thinking, well, I could deal with anything now. And then she said she met her son. And she said, the moment I saw my son, I thought, oh, I'm fucked.
I just took notes.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other recommendations for parents to be?
Oh gosh, yeah. I will have to comb through, but that's a significant one. That's a really important one.
It's one of my favorites, and I've read it many times and loved it. I tell you, I still think Dr. Spock is wonderful. The first line of Dr. Spock is, "You know more than you think you do."
Oh.
And that's the one thing you want to hear as a new parent.
And that's a book written in the 50s?
Yes, but I raised my children on it, and I absolutely loved it, and I think that his advice is all still very sane.
I will tell you, here's an interesting factoid. My mom, when she gave birth to me in New York City in 1967, was a pariah on the maternity ward for breastfeeding me.
That's right.
Really?
That was
How
out
times
of
have changed.
fashion in the late 60s.
Wow.
Yeah. But
Absolutely. And it was really kind of stunning because it seemed to me that I can't imagine why you would want to do anything else This is what your body's for. This is the best food you can possibly give your child.
Sorry, another Anne Lamott quote raises in my head where she talks about pumping. The new mothers breastfeed all the time, but they produce a lot of milk, and they often need to pump, especially if they're going away. They provide milk in the fridge for the baby. Anyway, there's nothing, unfortunately, there's nothing dignified about pumping breast milk, and Anne Lamott describes it specifically as it is the ultimate in bovine humiliation.
Now, both of you have gone through this process, and we're in the process of going through it, but naming. How do you come up with the name?
How did you come up with my name?
Well,
this is not an origin story that I know.
We talked about a lot of different names, and I think it was one we both liked. And your middle name is Whitney, so your name is Adam Whitney Savage. And we just thought that had a beautiful ring to it, that you could do anything you wanted with that name. Your father's first name was Whitney. He was called Lee, but his first name was Whitney. And your his father's grandfather was Whitney.
Joe Savage's dad?
Yes. So
okay.
It's a long family name. But we just thought Adam was a great name. And I hadn't heard hardly anybody who named their child that. And I felt so happy. And when you were about 4, I was out in Washington Square Park, and I said Adam, and 5 little boys turned around.
It was a popular name. I hate it when I choose a name. Julie and I labored for not weeks, but at least days on what to name our second dog, who ended up being named Maggie, only to discover at the end of that year that it was the most popular dog name that year.
Yeah, that information's out there now, right? And you're also informed by many things. You're informed by like the people you grew up with and their names and the associations you have with them. And then also pop culture. There's a lot of things that names become fashionable, and we all share that same pop culture, and it's tough. We're in a position where we know 7 people having children this year, and only one of them is one of the same gender. And so we only have one potential overlap.
Yeah. So this, when the boys were born in '99, it seemed like everyone in the mission had babies at that point. At least at that point, we lived over near 23rd and Mission, and the Walgreens there never had our diaper size in stock. There was so many times I had to drive all the way to the Safeway on 30th Street on Upper Mission in order to get the size I needed. Now everyone knows that I don't say my kids' names in public, but thing one and thing two, their mom and I, my ex-wife, we chose those names very quickly.
Really?
Oh.
We realized. We pulled each other and realized neither of us wanted to hear anybody else's opinions.
Yes.
We were both completely aligned. Like, we don't care what anyone thinks, and we don't want to hear what anyone thinks, and we don't even want a conversational aspect where they go, "Have you decided?" And you go, "Yeah, but we're not telling." "Well, I really like the name Logan," and none of that. We didn't want that conversation one bit. So the second we realized that, we chose both names for the boys within a matter of days. And we didn't know whether they were 2 boys or 2 girls. So we chose a boy name and we chose a girl name, and we had a backup second boy name. And when it turned out to be both boys, boop, we went with those. We told everyone.
What was the girl name?
Lily.
I love that name.
Lily Bell. That was the name we were thinking of. I don't know. I mean, but each of us had a connection to the names of the boys from different things in our past and we liked about those names. And we gave them our father's names as their middle names. But Lily Bell doesn't have any connection at all, except we just thought it was a beautiful, beautiful girl's name.
I had a wonderful conversation with your lovely publicist, Kristen, this morning, because my oldest daughter's name is Kristen. And we were discussing how it was spelled, and we were also discussing where it came from. And I told her that when I was pregnant, I had read this wonderful Norwegian saga called Kristen Lavransdatter. And she said, "Oh my gosh, my mother read the same book and named me after that same book."
That's amazing.
That's totally bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean,
So strange.
that's completely amazing. That's clearly you and Kristen's mom need to hang out,
We do.
and we need
sound
to
like we like
arrange
each
that
other.
as soon as possible.
Oh, I feel like this is an opportunity to learn about Adam as a kid. But I don't know if I want to dive in that.
Oh, you could dive into
deep.
that pool.
Yeah. So we have heard the stories of Adam in his first cardboard armor. Do you remember that?
I do
and
indeed.
what was it from your perspective?
It was quite beautiful. It was always surprising to me because Adam, from his first bills, did really nice ones. He did a man named George. Remember George?
The cardboard man that sat on the front
Cardboard
steps.
man sat on our front porch for years and years and years and used to scare absolutely everybody. George looked extremely real.
I wrote an article for Wired a few years ago about George. But I don't know if you remember, there's this moment, building George, I think I was about 15. No, I was younger than that.
Younger.
13?
I would say more like 12.
Okay, so I'm putting this cardboard thing together. Yeah, it's fairly primitive in some of its aspects. I hadn't yet built all those paper models of architectural buildings. But I remember being about 30% of the way into the build and seeing the parts around me and feeling like this object was forming. And it really was the first moment of genuine transcendence in every sense of that word in the making of something. And so I specifically remember I remember feeling that sense. Jung calls it the oceanic feeling, the feeling that you are part of something, that you are in something bigger than you. And it is a feeling I have been lucky enough to experience many times since then. But I remember that first moment of feeling like and I also then went to you and I said, Mom, I said, I just wanted to I went into the kitchen. I was building it in the front foyer, and I went into the kitchen where you were, and I said, I just want to chronicle right now at this moment on July 12th, 1979, that I feel truly and completely happy. Wow. And that has stuck with me ever since, and really deeply informed. My dad was an artist. My dad was a painter. And I realized, oh, wow, there's something to this. Like, there's some other.
Was he the spark? Was that like watching him create art made you want to?
Certainly, I grew up being encouraged to do that. And, all of my siblings are creative in really different and unique ways. So that was everywhere. But yeah, that moment right there was this sort of origin, and specifically working with corrugated cardboard. I tell that story a lot in public because, as I keep saying, corrugated cardboard is the gateway drug to make.
I love it. One thing which I once described to you recently that you had made that you had completely forgotten, but this was astonishing. And again, I think you were about 12 or 13. We had a very wide front porch, probably like 3 times the space of this. And it had, sort of posts on either side, then wide stairs. And my husband and I had been in Europe for a week, just getting away and having a wonderful vacation. We left the kids with somebody, I don't remember who. And when we came home, as I walked up towards the house, there was a intricate spider web over the entire front of the porch. And in the middle of it, it spelled Happy Mother's Day.
Wow.
It was an unbelievable... I didn't
paper?
take a...
No,
rope.
It was string.
Rope.
Wow.
I went through a whole spiderweb phase, and I think it was so. We had a house on Cape Cod where we still go on the summers, where I grew up going every summer, and I had an Uncle Paul who had a carpentry shop, and one of the things you did when you were there is you went by Uncle Paul's and you made puppets and you made things. And at one point he had me make a wooden frame and put nails around the perimeter and use string to make a star pattern, and then weave your own spider web. And so I made tons and tons and tons of spider webs. And since you told me that, I do have a memory of using some yarn of could it have been Mia Goldman that was babysitting us at that point? If I was that young,
I don't think so. But what was amazing about it, and I can't believe I didn't take a picture of it, was that it was so beautifully done. And it was, how hard is that? It's extremely difficult to write Happy Mother's Day in the middle of a spider web.
On a front porch.
Yes, yes. It was just an astonishing work of art. One of the most amazing I've ever seen.
So cardboard.
Shucks, Ma.
We've never had Adam so flustered on the podcast before. This is amazing.
One of the things that as knowing me that I love to do is to entertain and throw parties, and that was absolutely something that I grew up with. And my parents cooked so much. Nowadays, a 6-burner stove is pretty regular for someone who's serious about cooking. But I grew up with an 8-burner stove, and because such a thing was not available in the 60s and the 70s, what you did was you bought 2 identical stoves and put them next to each other.
Mm-hmm. 2 4-burners.
So you had 2 ovens and
Yeah.
and 8 burners in order to cook large meals for large groups of people.
Before we continue with this week's episode, I want to let you know about the other sponsor of Still Untitled this week, and that is Stitcher Premium. Stitcher Premium gets you completely ad-free episodes of hundreds of shows like Comedy Bang Bang, WTF with Mark Maron, and How Did This Get Made? You also get 21,000 hours of exclusive content, and new exclusive originals like Marvel's Wolverine are launching every week for Stitcher Premium members. If you love podcasts, you got to check it out. When you listen to ad-free eps in Stitcher Premium, your favorite podcasters also get paid. Help support your favorite shows and join Stitcher Premium today. For a free month of listening, go to StitcherPremium.com and use the promo code UNTITLED. All right, back to the program. You know, we get a lot of questions for you at events about your advice for parents raising their kids, the next generation of makers. What did you hope for Adam when he was growing up?
What an interesting question. I obviously just hoped that he would feel fulfilled with whatever he chose to do. I mean, I think that in our family, my husband was an artist from a very early age and knew that that was what he wanted to do. But he also was a realist and realized he wasn't going to make a living at it. So he always painted and always showed in New York, had a show almost every year in New York. But he also did many ancillary things that were art related and found that he could make a wonderful living being an animator for Sesame Street and doing TV commercials and various other things like that, all in the art field. And I think that all of our kids grew up feeling that he was a good example of the fact that if you love something, just go do it.
Get out
and
of
you'll
your way.
find a way to make your life work around it.
And I mean, even extending beyond to our extended families of uncles and cousins and everything, there's not a lot of rigorous path striking. Like, there's a lot of different ways that people achieved their careers. And so all around me were different examples of radically different ways to go about it.
It's true.
And did you have to push in one direction? Was it just letting...
Here's a question. So when I was in 7th grade, the summer between 7th and 8th grade, so that would have me between 12 and 13 years old, a really great time in any kid's life. And you took me to the White Plains Cultural Center to take a whole bunch of classes. Like you signed me up for like 4 different classes over that summer. I have never asked about how come. What was the reasoning? Because I hadn't done a lot of art classes or other kind of things before that.
Well, it was clear that you had a very, very strong creative bent. And I thought it was probably a good idea to put that creativity, to teach that creativity something. I mean, give you materials to be creative with. My husband went to about 4 different colleges, never graduated from any place, but he went foundation year at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. And that's the foundation year was where they taught you how to do everything art related.
Right.
And he always felt that was one of the most valuable things he had ever done. So it was sort of a way of starting to teach you how to do things art related in a more disciplined manner.
It was great because I did a little stone carving. I did a little pottery and firing. I did, I can't remember what else, but there were at least 2 other classes going
But it never felt like a thing that was forced onto you.
No. It was like, we're going to do this now. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Because oftentimes the things that your parents push onto you, you end up rebelling against.
No, there was no pushing on an agenda. And, like I've said many times in talks that I've given, our regular weekend activity was to go to the local public library and spend several hours there.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every single weekend. And then that was my first job, was working as a page and book sorter at the library, which, if you want to know where the good, sexy books are, is the best way to figure out.
In the vein of rebellion, what were the ways in which Adam rebelled? I want to hear about this.
Well, it's very interesting because it's kind of hard to rebel when you have a fairly loose family system. And there wasn't a huge amount of discipline in our family. I mean, we didn't really need to. Adam was always a good kid. And when you asked if I pushed him in any direction, I don't ever remember pushing you in any direction. I think we just sort of wanted you to find your own path.
I rebelled in secret.
Well,
yeah. So what were the ways in which you felt like you could rebel?
all kids
that
do.
You did?
Yeah, no, I remember at one point, my one Monday or what. My mom is asking me at the breakfast table, like, what did you do this weekend? And in my head, it is literally like a Judd Apatow film of the most epic proportions of teenage shenanigans of cars racing down the highway and running from, law enforcement and through
Ferris
parks
Bueller.
and stuff. Yeah, completely. All of that stuff goes on, and I go, nothing. And there's this point at which my dad turns to my mom, and he goes, he has a completely secret life that we will never know about. And I was like, well, I'm really glad someone knows about that.
Well,
so I rebelled in secret. If I did things like steal road signs, I hid them. If I snuck out at night, I usually snuck back long before it was possible for me to get caught. And I was able to do that a lot. What else did I do? I was a lonely kid. I've spent a lot. So in Tarrytown, where I grew up, it's right on the edge of the Rockefeller's estate, and what is also a blend between the Rockefeller estate and New York State parkland. And there's thousands of acres of it. I mean, it's really amazing. I spent weekend after weekend just wandering through those woods. Alone, by myself, following the Pecanico River up and then hopping out on the highway and hitchhiking back to Tarrytown.
we did a lot of sort of family hiking too.
We did.
A lot of family walking around there, and also family trips. It seems to me, I remember we used to go jump in the car and go someplace.
A lot of driving, because it used to take 6 hours to get to Cape Cod.
Yes,
I mean it was a hell of a trudge, and I remember lots of fighting with my sister in the back seat, as per anybody's childhood.
Well, we had a Volkswagen bus back in the 60s and 70s. And in those days, of course, there were no car seats. So we'd be on a long trip, and the children would be running up and down the aisle in the VW bus. I mean, now people would just faint.
And we were smoking.
You were not.
It seems like you both get along really well now, at least, here. Was it always that way, or does it take time to get to that place? And
We've always been very close.
We have always been very close, and I think we've always felt able to talk to each other, too. I mean, when things don't work, we usually talk about it.
I feel like that's a big fear as a impending parent, not being able to connect with a child that way.
It is actually, as I have found so much more keenly in the past few years, when your kids are old enough to ask for your help, you hope that you have earned the right to give it. That the first time when either thing 1 or thing 2 got drunk, it happened to be in our house. And, I remember one of them was like, well, wow, I'm really glad you're so cool about it. And I was said, look, all I want is for you to call me when you're at the party and you don't feel like you're comfortable to get home or someone's too messed up. And I want you to call me first so I can keep you safe. And so I'm earning that call by not freaking out about this right now. And I've gotten that call. And that's all you want. You want to be able to keep them safe. You want them to trust you. And so, we did the thing that a lot of parents of teenagers do, which is, if you fuck up, I'm going to discipline you. But if you have messed up so badly you don't feel safe, no punishment. Call me. We will rescue you. I can get someone to you no matter where you are. We will rescue, and there won't be punishment for that type of rescue. That is all bets are off. And you get really explicit with that, because the moment they start moving out in the world, it's just terror all the time.
Absolutely. I just have to tell a little aside story about that incident when Thing 2 drank too much. There was a friend who was with Thing 1 and Thing 2.
It was Thing 1 who drank too much.
Everybody
drank, but yeah.
In any case, the friend apparently had taken a first aid course, was very knowledgeable, and he knew that it was important to keep Thing 2 on his side, so if he vomited, he wouldn't inhale his vomit. And that was a wonderful thing. And he later on said that he'd done that. And his mother said, when she heard about this, well, that's kind of wonderful that you used your first aid training. He said, oh, no, it wasn't first aid training. I learned that on Breaking Bad.
You learn what not to do. Yeah, you learn what to do by watching what not to do.
I actually, I was able to tell that story to Vince Gilligan, and he rightly appreciated it.
Well, there you go. Well, that's some good parenting advice. I feel like this is the deepest episode of this podcast yet.
It is, the degree to which your kids open up your own vulnerability is astounding. And what you do with that vulnerability is the choice that you constantly make with kids. All of your anger at them when they screw up is masked terror at their future. And it's that exact thing that Robin Williams said so articulately. It's like half of you sees your kid accepting the Nobel Prize and the other half sees them going, "Do you want fries with that?" and you bounce between both of these extremes constantly. And then, frankly, the thing I feel like I learned from you guys is what really screws people out of life. It's true that everyone suffers. It is not true that everyone suffers equally. That is the tragedy of human existence. And the people that really suffer are the people, I think, who did not feel like they were loved. And I knew no matter how badly I was going to screw up, my kids weren't going to suffer that illusion that they weren't loved, as I was not. I knew deeply that you guys held me incredibly close the whole time.
Yeah. It's like what Mr. Rogers said. The greatest thing you can do is let someone know that they can be loved and that they have the capacity for love.
Dude, watching the trailer for Won't You Be My Neighbor, Mr. Rogers documentary, we saw that at Infinity War. There was not a dry eye in the house. And as soon as we're done with this podcast, we'll go home and I'll show you the trailer because holy cow, Mr. Rogers is a goddamn hero.
I want you also to say that thing you said yesterday about parenting, about disappointing.
Well, my dad said to me when I was 18, casually, as part of another part of the conversation, well, all parents disappoint their children. And at that moment in time, I worshiped my dad more than anything. It would then be several years before he would truly disappoint me. And I loved the fact later as a parent, I realized he wasn't doing this intentionally, but he was contextualizing my future for me. He was giving me something to hold up against it, a lens with which to look at this experience. Because the point at which you realize your parents are not omnipotent and fallible. And Mary Carr writes about this in Liars Club. She says, first time you get away with a lie. It's the first time you feel like a grown-up, but it's also the first time you feel truly alone because you know your parents can't see through it.
Yeah.
You realize that they're human. And this is really, really true. That contextualization my dad did for me was so vital, and it's informed so much of the way I talk to the boys over the years. And I have had it come back to me. I've had them deal with friendships and relationships in different ways because of things that Julie and I had said to them years before. And that feels really gratifying.
It's wonderful. I had a very complicated relationship with my father. He was a very distant person.
Picture Max von Sydow with no charm. That was my grandfather.
And it was always a little bit difficult, but there are a few things which stand out for me. And it's interesting. One of them was when you were born in Columbia Presbyterian. And as Adam said, I was the only breastfeeding mother. And one morning, my father came to see me because it was his hospital. He was there for 50 years. And he said, how did the 2 a.m. feeding go? And I said, oh, my goodness. I think I slept through it. I don't think that anybody woke me up. And he said, what? And he went out in the corridor and he walked up and down that corridor. He said, you bring my daughter that baby every 4 hours or I will have everybody on this floor fired.
By the way, here's another little story. I broke up until late in Mythbusters' tenure, when I broke my left index finger, I had only up till that point broken one bone in my body, and it was my 7th vertebrae. I had a diving accident at 18 years old, on my 18th birthday, in fact. And I dove headfirst into a rock I couldn't see under the water and compressed my spine and chipped a big chunk out of my C7. And I was taken to the hospital in Westchester County and then transferred because my grandfather carried a lot of water at Columbia Pres, as they say. So we had me transferred to Columbia Presbyterian, and Mom followed me in the car. And I go wheel in, and she stops at the desk to check me in. And they say, has he ever been in this hospital before? And Mom says, no. Wait. Yes. 18 years ago today. And then she fainted.
I had kept myself together. This had been like 5 hours or 6 hours since you had had this injury, and Adam and I had both been very brave that whole afternoon. We were both scared to death because you felt that any moment he could move and then be paralyzed. It was a genuine fear. And we had both kept ourselves together, not a tear, not a fear, until I got to that hospital desk and had to say, oh my God, he was born here 18 years ago, and burst into tears and dropped to the floor.
Wow.
There you go. Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day. Friend, thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure.
It was a great pleasure. I always love doing this. It's fun. It's nice to be welcomed.
Before we go, is there stuff we should know about on the site this week?
We're going to, when this is airing, we'll be at Maker Faire at the end of this week. So if you're in Bay Area, please come see us in San Mateo. Adam will be there on Sunday.
Giving a Sunday sermon, absolutely.
Yep. And if you're there throughout the San Mateo Fairgrounds, please say hi. We'd love to see you there. Until then, we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.